Now, on to our first story. Could diplomacy end the war with Iran? Well, just a few hours ago, US President Donald Trump wrote on his social media platform, Truth Social, there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. Now, this is in sharp contrast to Sir Keir Starmer, who's pushing for talks. The Prime Minister is urging Washington and Tehran back to the negotiating table to calm the conflict in the Middle East.
The best way forward for the regime and the world is a negotiated settlement with Iran where they give up their nuclear ambitions.
Meanwhile, the president of Iran said in a statement that some countries have begun mediation efforts, adding the region is committed to lasting peace, but have no hesitation in defending our nation's dignity and sovereignty. So is diplomacy the key to ending the war? Well, joining me now from Washington is our very own Ben Leo, GB News presenter and chief US correspondent. Ben, good evening, or good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We understand that this war is not very popular in the US, and in fact, Trump was elected on a mandate to end this kind of intervention. But nevertheless, I'm imagining there's a lot of interest in the progress of the conflict.
Yeah, you say the war isn't very popular, and that was true, Miriam, at the start of the war on Saturday last week, of course, when it all kicked off. However, there's been a couple of big polls since then which suggest now the American public are maybe 50-50. One poll was 50-50, the other was 49-48. So it seems to me that the PR war, the second war the administration is waging here in America, on top of the one in the Middle East, they seem to be turning a corner on that front. In terms of Keir Starmer and, of course, our intervention in the war, or lack of up until this point, it's been a bit of a tricky one for the UK government because, of course, Keir Starmer, for one reason or another, doesn't want to do anything unless it's approved with international law, as we've seen with so many other things before, with the small boats crisis and whatnot. But that, of course, has prompted and provoked President Trump into yet again using the Chagos Islands as a leveraging tool. We saw it a couple of months ago with the Greenland fiasco when Keir Starmer was saying, well, the future of the Greenlanders should be down to the Greenlanders only. President Trump, the next day, of course, fired off that Truth Social post saying that the Chagos deal was stupid. Again, we've seen it used as leverage from the president now with Iran. Keir Starmer this week on the receiving end of a barrage of insults from President Trump, not least at the start of the week saying that he was certainly no Churchill. The Telegraph then ran a story yesterday saying President Trump had been in recent weeks calling Keir Starmer a loser. And again today, when Keir Starmer was suggesting yesterday that President Trump should negotiate some sort of deal with the Islamist despot regime, President Trump went on Truth Social this morning, and although not naming Keir Starmer directly, he said absolutely no deal. We continue with the one sole aim of unconditional surrender. So Keir Starmer doing himself and the Labour government no favours when it comes to keeping in President Trump's good books. But for now, it seems to be going down, I'd argue, pretty well with Starmer's supporters back home in the UK.
Has the administration given any indication of what comes next? It's very impressive to see this military operation, of course, destroying much of Iran's military infrastructure. But if Trump gets to choose the next Iranian leader, as he said he will, what happens now? Is it a puppet government? Is it a Venezuela Mark II?
Well, I think we'd all... So the term puppet government was mentioned yesterday, and my argument last night on the Late Show Live was, well, an American puppet government for now would be better than a murderous Islamic regime like the one we're seeing crumbling beneath its feet now. So I don't think the term puppet government is necessarily a bad thing for now. There's also the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who has been doing the rounds here in DC in recent weeks saying, look, if and when this Islamist regime falls and there is an opportunity for somebody else to come in, I can be the transition. I'm not saying that I'll take power permanently, but I can be the transition. I've got a team ready to go. I've got experts. I've got all sorts ready to make sure that can happen. President Trump saying he's not really a big fan of Reza Pahlavi. That is despite thousands of Iranians taking to the streets calling his name. But in terms of President Trump taking his pick for who would take over, I mean, it's not that surprising to me that when you've got a country and a nation risking its military's lives, spending hundreds of millions of dollars waging this war. The latest figure, by the way, was something like $2 billion a day it's costing American taxpayers. That's according to Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill. So when you're having that kind of expenditure, both in terms of lives lost, the risk to life and cost to taxpayers, why wouldn't you expect the leader of the United States of America, in this case President Trump, to have some sort of say in what's going on? And by the way, just one more thing to add tonight. Nigel Farage is at Mar-a-Lago having dinner with members of the Trump administration, not necessarily President Trump himself, but definitely members of the administration tonight. It's the so-called Winter White House, of course, in Palm Beach, Florida, lobbying the administration on the Chagos issue. And for me, when you take into context everything that's happened this week with President Trump, Keir Starmer calling him a loser, saying he's no Churchill, for Farage to get that invite tonight to go to Palm Beach, sit down with the administration and discuss UK policy, for me, is a massive middle finger, yet again, to Keir Starmer.
We're living in a time of what feels like pretty significant social change, and it makes us question things that we've even taken for granted for decades. And one of those at the moment that people are wondering about is actually money. Is the money in your bank account safe? Should you be investing elsewhere? Are we looking at a potential global crash? What will it mean for your savings? Is there a way that you could be using your money that might be outside of government control even? Well, TallyMoney is potentially one solution. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by the CEO and founder of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. What is TallyMoney?
Well, at TallyMoney, you basically get gold you can spend. So we give people an individual account in their name, everyday account. They get a sort code, an account number. They use that account just like they would pounds from their bank, but it's milligrams of gold that we brand as Tally.
Okay. Why would you do that, though? What is the benefit to the customer instead of just having a normal pound sterling account?
Gold's performance against the pound is above 11% per annum over the last 25 years on average. But we still need money in our daily lives, and we have savings. We know that it's good common sense and prudent to save up for things, not just living credit. You know, whether it's a holiday or a rainy day, your retirement planning, you need to have money in your life, basically, that you can rely on, that's dependable, that nobody meddles with, that nobody can weaponize against you, which is another element of government control when it's the government currency, which we could talk about another time. And it should be pretty simple and straightforward, and that's what we deliver at Tally. And really, we just want people to feel safe and happy with their money. There was a time when the bigger your bank balance, the more confident you felt. Now it's like, I need to do something with it. I can't leave it there. In Tally, you can.
Okay, brilliant. Cameron Parry from TallyMoney, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.
Now let's return to our panel to discuss this now. Very different approach, obviously, taken by Donald Trump to Sir Keir Starmer. I can see you're waiting to jump in.
An astonishingly different approach to journalism from the leading US correspondent, Ben Lear, who I like very much and I've worked with. Where is the balance in that? So Nigel Farage, who's the MP for Clacton and on whose programme I appear regularly, is off at an event in Mar-a-Lago. Most people in this country, maybe not GB News viewers, but most people in this country think that Donald Trump is a deranged bully. I would like to see a little bit of patriotism in backing and supporting the British Prime Minister, who has been quite wise and quite sensible in not jumping to Trump's tune of going into a war with no clear aim other than what Benjamin Netanyahu wants. I mean, today, Miriam, we have seen reports in the Telegraph that Russia is giving information to Iran about US shipping. So where does that leave Trump's relationship with Putin? Where does that leave Trump's relationship with Ukraine? This whole thing is because of Netanyahu wanting to attack Iran. And nobody for 1 minute is standing up to say that it isn't a most appalling regime, murderous, dreadful people. But the idea that you can just go in and remove somebody, which, of course, Trump did in Venezuela. So Putin's trying to do that in Ukraine. What's to stop Xi doing it in Taiwan? Or, come to that, somebody going to do it in America or Israel?
I mean, James, Jo's right, isn't she? Until about 2 weeks ago, pretty much everybody in political circles in this country and in the wider country thought that Iraq was one of the most terrible mistakes the West had ever made, that the idea we could topple Saddam Hussein and then this beautiful, flowering, capitalist democracy would grow up was just wrong. And yet here we are again, doing something potentially similar, but without foreseeing the consequences.
Gosh, there's an awful lot to get into here. I think that we are always at risk of fighting the last war, and just because they have similar sounding names does not mean that Iraq and Iran are necessarily all that similar. They're different ethnic makeups, different religious makeups, different political makeups, all kinds of different things. I'm sure that not many people watching have been to either of these countries. I've been fortunate enough to go to Iraq quite a lot, actually. It's a very different place to how it was under Saddam Hussein. I didn't obviously get to go there under him, but there is a very different world that is trying to be built in that region, and not just in the little entrepôts like Dubai or wherever else, but what the big challenge in that region, and frankly in lots around the world, has been this regime, and in the form of the Iranian regime and the Ayatollah, who has been the biggest sponsor of terrorism around the world, has killed lots of British people because they were the ones that's funding and sponsoring a lot of that response in Iraq, killed lots of Americans as well, killed a hell of a lot of their own people. And I think that we need to be very careful of just being able to be very blasé and saying, well, obviously they're not very nice, but international law. I think that you don't get to necessarily just say that and get away with it, because what you're saying is that the niceties of international law are more important than the lives of all these people. And it's not, and just to answer your question, Jo, you said earlier about Taiwan, it is not international law that is stopping Xi Jinping from trying to invade Taiwan. It's Lockheed Martin, it's the 101st Airborne, it's whichever carrier group happens to be there at the time. And Putin did try to do this to Volodymyr Zelensky, and he failed to do it. But he wasn't worried about international law. He has broken international law multiple times, and the West did absolutely nothing, whether it was in Georgia, whether it was in Crimea, whether it was in Syria or now. International law is a very useful thing when it comes to negotiating trade disputes and shipping problems and things like that. But when we come down to the brass tacks of this stuff, Britain has no hard power to be able to have any say in any of this, which is why we're just bystanders.
Well, then we shouldn't be criticised for not being there. I mean, international law, this casual disregard for international law, I find very distressing, because it's about a moral compass. When you have got Donald Trump in the White House, who flips and flops and does exhibit behaviour of, severe derangement, I think, now, and even his own supporters are beginning to say he's looking a bit weird. 1 minute he's in favour of the Chagos Islands, and, all the experts and legal experts in America looked through it. They had plenty of time if they wanted to. When David Lammy was Foreign Secretary, who said, if he doesn't like it, or if US doesn't like it, we won't go ahead with it. They said, this is great. Then he changes his mind. He changes his mind from one day to the next. And the point is that you cannot, however vile somebody is, you cannot just go in there and then say, all right, we're going in to take out this one person. That's bad enough. But you can't then say, and I'm going to choose who the next leader is. I mean, as you rightly say, James, there are 93 million people living in that country, of many, many different tribes, religious and ethnic groups. The idea that there's going to be a homogenous agreement of who Donald Trump decides. And Keir Starmer's right, it's got to be through mediation. The other thing I would say, if you want to
But sorry to stop you, Jo, but the West has tried to negotiate with Iran for 22 years to try to stop their nuclear programme. That has failed. And you might disagree with Trump's method and his aims for regime change, but nevertheless, probably military action was going to be inevitable once that negotiation failed.
But then you need to be absolutely clear, and you need to say, right, this is what our aim is. I mean, all the time you've got Pete Hegseth, and you've got this footage being shown on television in America. People are watching a video game, and if you've got the Secretary of Defence, or Secretary of War, as he now calls himself, talking about your toast and people clutching pearls and all the rest of it, you're putting it not in the context of 1,200 people that we already know who are dead. You're not putting it in the context of a girls' school bombed by the Americans, probably by mistake. But it's pretty clear that that was bombed.
But I don't think that's been fully investigated yet,
although we know that it has happened.
It's a very big claim. The Americans said they were nowhere near at the time.
Final word from James.
Look, I think that you're right in the sense that it would be useful to hope that the American administration had an end goal in mind in this.
Which they don't.
Well, I think what's clear from everything that Trump has done all the way through both of his terms so far is that he doesn't just go and say, this is what I'm going to try and do, because the guy is nothing if not a good negotiator, and keeping people destabilised and not knowing is a very, very useful tactic to have. And the last thing I would say is it's very important that we put this in the broadest possible context of grand strategy of what happens between the contest in the world between the United States and China, who have been supplying the Iranians with all kinds of goodies to try and defend themselves and make trouble in this part of the world, as they did in Venezuela and Cuba, and are trying to do in Britain as well, as we've seen this week.